The journey to the draft is driven by AAA. AAA, roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 25th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
And welcome back to another edition of the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran Duffy. It's championship week here in college football. A lot to cover as the regular season is over in the college football season for 2019. Crazy to say, but we've got a lot to cover. Obviously, a lot of announcements here concerning the 2020 NFL Draft. A lot of players whose seasons are now in the rearview mirror, making those plans now for what they're going to do next spring in April's draft. A lot going on. We're going to kick things off at the top with Ben Fennell in our Saturday Scouting segment. We've got a friend of the show, Kyle Crabbs, joining from the Draft Network for Mr. Relevant. Tony Pauline here for Draft Buzz. You do not want to miss that. We've got some breaking news there with Tony. Scouting report on one of the top underclassmen who has already officially announced that he will enter next year's draft. And then we'll wrap things up here with our draft mailbag. But let's start things off. Top of the show, Saturday Scouting.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, well, back for another edition here of Saturday Scouting. Our friend Ben Fennell. Ben, welcome back from Columbia.
Columbia, South Carolina, yep.
How'd you like? That was not your first time there.
No, I went there earlier this year.
That's right. That's right.
Did the Florida game, yeah.
All right, well, how's the return trip? Last year you had didn't you have Starkville 4 times?
Yeah.
And you had Gainesville twice last year?
I think it was the other way around. We did Florida 4 or 5 times and Mississippi State 2 or 3 times. South Carolina 2 times.
You haven't had that many of the repeat visits this year, though.
No, not particularly. South Carolina was one of the double dips.
All right,
but
there's worse places to go than Columbia.
It was cool. It was
you get some BBQ?
SEC town. You know?
Yeah, you get some barbecue.
Yeah, a little bit.
All right, there you go.
Down at Docks. Yeah.
Well, you didn't have a great game.
No, terrible game.
Yeah, Clemson pulled away early.
I was hoping for another big upset like South Carolina beat Georgia mid-season, but
no, didn't happen.
Ran out of juice.
Who gets the game ball in this one?
Just going to give it to the Clemson receivers. Justin Ross, T. Higgins, each over 100 yards. Justin Ross had 9 for 111, a touchdown. T. Higgins, 2. All sorts of acrobatic catches at the catch point, high point in, toe in the sideline, tracking over the shoulders, as advertised.
It seems like that passing game is really kind of coming together even since the last time you saw them. North Carolina, they were kind of sputtering out a little bit, inconsistent up and down.
I think Trevor Lawrence was just pressing to start the year. I think, the expectations, the national championship, the Heisman kind of contention. I think he just was pressing a little bit to start the year, and he kind of settled down and realized he doesn't have to be a superhero. You have a lot of weapons. Get the ball out. Be responsible. I think their defense has actually taken just a bit of a step back this year as well that a lot of people aren't really looking at, but he's really settled in over the last 2 months and has really put his name back into the Heisman conversation, and they're undefeated. They've done everything they need to do in 2019.
Who does Higgins remind you of? Is there a guy that who are the kinds of players that kind of come to mind when you talk about a T. Higgins?
Long, lean, quick, agile, an above the rim style of player. Not
straight line speed?
I don't think he's going to be a burner.
Okay.
I think he has long strides, and I think he has good speed for his size, being 6'4", 205. He looks like that basketball player style of player. He's going to be nowhere near 215, 220. So he get bumped off his routes a little bit, have some problem in press coverage here and there.
So not like a Devontae Parker.
No, I think Parker's much thicker and somebody that was ready to battle at the catch point. This guy he's a jumper, he's a leaper, he's agile, he's athletic.
But Justin Hunter had long speed, really long speed.
Yeah, it's that combination of the Justin Hunter. He's not quite as explosive as Martavis Bryant, but it's that style of player, that type of body, that Chris Henry maybe coming out of West Virginia with Cincinnati Bengals.
Sure.
He's a really kind of tough guy to find a comparison because he's not really a technician. He's not really a guy that wins with particular length or size or physicality. He just has really good all-around ability. He has, the 6'4" frame. He's a good enough speed. He could jump out the building. Really good tracking ability, strong hands. I'd have to think about that for an NFL style. Yeah.
All right, well, let's go to your one play takeaway. Walking away from this game, is there one rep that really sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, well, Isaiah Simmons, as advertised, filled up the stat sheet: 10 tackles, a sack, 2 TFLs, PBU, but particularly that pass breakup down the field.
Okay.
Anytime he needs to turn and run in coverage, I'm always putting that under the microscope because I want to see what he's going to do on third down in the NFL. Can he turn to run against slot receivers, tight ends? Can he play the deep hole in Tampa 2 and some zone coverages? But he had to run down the field here. I don't remember if it was a slot or a tight end, but was a little clunky in coverage, but the last second turned and found the ball, was very physical and grabby throughout the rep. But because he found the ball, they didn't throw the flag, pass breakup, third down. And I just thought that showed some really good coverage savvy, that he was sloppy in, his coverage responsibility and staying in phase, but he felt comfortable enough at the catch point, turn back, find the ball. And most times, you give an effort to find that ball, the refs are going to kind of let the contact go because you have every right to that football as the offensive player does.
So seeing him live again, are you leaning backer front
Dude,
seven,
he's impressive,
leaning away,
man. Dude, he
safety?
is so impressive.
Where
blitzer, range, downhill, matchup blitzer, he could plug the run. I don't know. I really don't know. He fills up the stat sheet.
Yeah.
But what you're going to do with him at the next level, I think we're just starting to get into that conversation of where you play him, positional fit. Is he a scheme fit type of guy? It's going to be one of the more divisive conversations around draft season. He's a great football player. He's a great athlete. We're not disputing that. He's going to be a top 20 pick. But where do you use him versus what role, what skill set, what are his best abilities, what does he need to improve upon? And he is so impressive looking without pads on. Man, he is enormous.
Yeah.
It's like 6'3", 6'4". I'm looking for comparisons. We were talking about with the crew. Is he Darius Leonard?
Right. Yep.
Is he more of a Darren Lee coming out of Ohio State? Is he Jabril Peppers?
Well, that's why I was going to bring it up because
is he Taylor Mays?
Yeah,
is he Obi Melanfanu?
Right.
I don't know.
Well, the Eagles play Jabril Peppers this week and with the Giants. I did him. He was my scouting report over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, and I kind of brought the conversation big picture with these linebacker safety hybrids with Simmons in mind. I mentioned Simmons and said, you have to have a plan for what that guy's going to be. Figure out what his strengths are. What did he do in college that best translates to what he's going to do in the league? In Cleveland, Jabril Peppers, he was asked to play 45 yards off the ball sometimes as a deep safety, wasn't particularly effective. Now you see him with the Giants, he's playing close to the ball. He's manned up on tight ends. He's down in the box. He's very active. He's got a bunch of forced fumbles this year. I mean, he's around the football all the time.
And I've really studied these nickel Sam players, which I call halfway players. You're not a Mike or a Will player. You're not a true box player. You're half safety and you're half an outside linebacker.
Yeah.
When you make those plays on the football field, I'm starting to not be impressed by them because that's how Darren Lee made his money. That's how Terrell Hanks at New Mexico State made a lot of his plays last year.
Yep.
You're not accounted for in the blocking scheme in the box. So a lot of times you're that last one to come in unblocked. You get some big hits on the ball carriers. You clean up a lot of tackles. You're unaccounted for a lot of pressure schemes. So Jabril Peppers made a lot of plays in the box for Michigan, but he's unaccounted for a lot of times. He's the smallest, most athletic player in that front seven when he gets in there. So he looks really impressive. Is that where you're going to play in the NFL? I don't know.
Right. Yeah,
and you can't just say all these athletic, oversized safeties are going to be will linebackers. That's not your catch-all for positionless players in the NFL, or else you're going to be in some big trouble like Darren Lee has been with the Jets, and now he's on his second team after being a first-round pick.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating conversation. It's one we've had numerous times over the last few years.
And it's not saying he's a scrub or a bust or anything. It's a much more nuanced conversation about where do you play him in the NFL.
Yep.
And not all fans are ready for that conversation because it's not saying he's going to be a failure in the NFL or he can't play or have the ability. But it's a deeper conversation of his skill set versus where you play him versus scheme.
Yep. Yeah, it's. We had the conversation with Peppers. We had it with Miles Jack. You mentioned Darren Lee. This has been a repetitive conversation we've had over the last few years. But Simmons, a very, very intriguing talent. Yeah. Let's get to your off the bus guy. You mentioned how good Simmons looks off the hoof. What about the rest of these guys?
Yeah, everybody. I must have done 10 laps around the field, just walking around, just trying to watch each position group. And their O-line's impressive, and they have all these 5-star corners behind the scenes, and the receivers. There's a handful of receivers that don't even see the field.
I know that was
Joseph Nada and Frank Ladson
Yep.
and DeAndre Overton, I think, is a senior that barely plays. And but the quarterback, I watched Trevor Lawrence. Man, the ball just hums out of this kid's hands in pregame warm-up. I don't know if he's putting a little extra mustard on it, just getting loose, but man, this thing came out really sharp.
You hear it, huh?
He's a big kid too. He's broad. Yep. His arms are getting a little bit more rocked up each time I see him, man. He's really putting the work in the weight room, and it translates to the field. That ball really comes out fast and high velocity. He's an accurate player. He's athletic. He's starting to be able to throw for some more awkward platforms and arm angles too. And then just watching him throw to this receiver group in warm-ups, it's just fun.
Yeah, no.
You know, just kind of sit down and just enjoy some sunshine and watch these kids warm up. It's fun.
We'll be talking a little bit more about this Clemson team next week.
I'm thinking so. Yeah.
The college football playoff, the official playoff bracket comes out on Sunday, so we'll be talking about that next week on the show. Let's go to your down the road freak show. Obviously, a lot of options here with this Clemson team.
Yeah, plenty of them. You know, obviously South Carolina has some interesting players too. I really like Joe Horn's kid at corner. Probably the best defensive player outside of Javon Kinlaw on that defense. But Andrew Booth, 5-star true freshman for Clemson. Not sure if he's seen the field this year. Actually, he has, because Clemson's literally played everybody on their roster.
Yep.
But a kid down the road that I think will take over that cornerback spot from A.J. Terrell or Kevon Walls.
Yep. Well, let's talk about it real quickly. Last week we talked about those guys that are heading to Mobile for the Senior Bowl. We talked about Brian Edwards going up against that secondary, Kevon Wallace, and
Edwards did not play, by the way.
Edwards didn't play, right? Exactly. We talked, and then on the other side, Kinlaw going up against that offensive line with John Simpson and Cervenka and Jermaine Ankrum, DJ Wanham from South Carolina. Did anybody from that group stand out that we talked about last week?
Yeah, Cervenka, I don't think he has it to be an NFL player. He's losing reps to like a freshman or a sophomore as well, rotating at that right guard spot. Javon Kinlaw, this scheme does not do him any favors to produce or put him in a position to be successful. They have a lot of 3-man rushes where he's the nose tackle and just getting absolutely sandwiched by both guards in the center. Right. I had a package I was selling to my producer, I think 2 or 3 plays where he was triple teamed on 3rd downs.
Right.
It's like, what do you want him to do there? Put him on the edge on a guard at 3-tech and let him work on a half man and try to get up the field. But these kind of 3-man rushes where he's lined up, head up with the center with the guards unoccupied, they're just making sure that he doesn't ruin the play. And then occasionally DJ Wanham, will get a good rush from the edge because he's one-on-one. But Kinlaw's a guy, I think he's going to be a much better NFL player and have much more production, because you have to look at how he's used at South Carolina. You're not going to see a lot of numbers in the stat sheet. There's a reason for that.
This is why the Senior Bowl is going to be so big for him.
No question. I think he's going to go to the Senior Bowl and tear that place up, man.
Really?
He's going to be a problem down there. Kind of like, not in the same style, but the way Sheldon Rankins went down there a couple years ago, and he was unblockable. And I think he put himself into – he was a first-round talent, and he went down there and just whooped on everybody, and they kind of stamped it and said –
It was like Cam Jordan a few years ago.
Exactly.
Before that did that. Aaron Donald obviously did that. A bunch of defensive
big
linemen
opportunity to show maybe something you weren't giving the opportunity to show at South Carolina.
Yeah, no question.
So I think big week for him down at Senior Bowl.
Yeah, I think you could say that about a couple of these D tackles heading down to Mobile this year. All right. I missed the Iron Bowl this week. I was not happy about it with how the game went. The game I did watch, by the time I got back settled in, I watched like the first 3 quarters of wouldn't even call it a game, but Ohio State and Michigan.
Right.
Watched the first 3 quarters of that one. That was a laugher. It looked like we might have a game. Michigan goes down opening drive and scores. Said, all right, let's go. I'm hoping to see a competitive game, and it was not.
No.
Ohio State, made quick work of them, but came back. More Pac-12 with me. I went and watched Utah versus Colorado.
Oh, great game.
Bradley and I, 5 tackles, 1.5 sacks in the game. To me, he gets my game ball. He was a guy who was really, really impressive. Watching that Utah defense, those guys fly around. We talked about him a lot on this podcast. Continue to impress. And I
destroyed that offensive line of Colorado. Gave them problems up and down the line.
They couldn't do anything.
Yeah, whether it was Foku or Penasini or Anai. All sorts of problems.
I'm rooting as a football fan for Utah to get into the playoff.
Me too.
Because I just want to see that defense be tested, in the trenches, on the perimeter. They struggle with Michael Pittman in that loss against USC on Friday night. Like, I know that, but I want to see this group in prime time against some of these top tier offenses.
I particularly want to see Utah against Clemson. I don't know why. I think Utah would destroy that offensive line.
Really?
I think they would give that Clemson offense all sorts of problems.
That can change a game.
No question. And they're not only are they fun to watch, they're deep, they're violent, they're exciting. They have a quarterback putting up all sorts of of numbers. Yep. I swear Tyler Huntley is just behind Joe Burrow in a lot of categories. Play action, down the field passing, throwing under pressure. Zach Moss, really exciting running back.
Yep.
They have a tight end hybrid kid that showed out last week with a bunch of nice plays.
Right, yep.
Fun team. There's playmakers all over that team. And I didn't like that Feinbaum came on today and was like, the nation doesn't want Utah in there.
Get out of here, man.
And his argument was, it's Utah.
Right.
That's not fair to Utah.
Right.
Utah is one of the best teams in the country, a fun team to watch. That just tells me Feinbaum has not watched the Utah Utes in 2019.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, it's Championship Sunday, or Championship Saturday, I should say. Really, it's Championship weekend, because Friday night we've got the Pac-12 title. Oregon
that's Friday
and Utah.
night.
That's Friday night.
Oh, good.
Friday night ABC.
Nice.
It's Herb Street and Fowler
great.
on that
Nice.
game Friday night. So that's a big one. So that's got huge playoff implications in that one.
Absolutely.
But where are you heading for Saturday?
Well, I'll be watching that Friday night matchup in the hotel room. I'm heading to Memphis for the American Conference Championship game, a rematch from last week. Memphis Tigers again against the Cincinnati Bearcats.
All right, well, let's get into some of these prospects. Memphis is actually a team that I've seen live.
Interesting.
I saw them when they came here to the Link to take on Temple.
Their only loss of the year.
That's right. It was tough. I mean, they went back and forth. Temple did everything they could to allow Memphis back into the game because they took an early lead. And then Memphis came back. Temple took another double-digit lead and then gave it back. It was a tough one, but Temple ended up coming out on top.
Yeah, so a couple prospects to watch in this game. Obviously not, the Clemson, Florida's, LSU's of the world here. So quarterback Brady White in Memphis. He's actually Arizona State transfer. Came out in the 2015 recruiting class.
Wow.
Josh Rosen was the number 1 quarterback. Francois, Blake Barnett, Brady White was number 4, actually. So pretty highly touted kid. Went to Arizona State, ended up transferring to Memphis. Not sure if he's an NFL player, but a kid that likes to throw it down the field in a fun offense.
Kenny Gainwell, the running back, he was on the semifinalist list for the Doak Walker Award as the top running back in the country.
Oh, he was on the semi list.
He was on the semi list. He made some plays in that game. We talked about Patrick Walker, I believe the senior running back. That was a guy, Patrick Taylor. Patrick Taylor was the senior coming in. I remember talking with Darrell Henderson, with Tony Pollard at the Combine, and they were loving Patrick Taylor. Oh, big kid, physical. He's going to be the guy. Taylor gets hurt early in the year. Yeah. And Gainwell comes in and has been producing at a high level. Yeah,
so Taylor was supposed to take Darrell Henderson's role.
Right.
And then Gainwell comes in and takes Tony Pollard's role. But obviously with the injury, Gainwell's had to kind of step up and take the full brunt of the carries. But just really quick, because he's only a sophomore, very, very, very impressive kid, a dual threat running back.
Yep.
They'll motion him into the slot. I just watched him run a corner route from the slot. I watched him have 2 back shoulder catches against Tulane, one for 70 yards, another 30-yard touchdown.
So this is the kind of player we're dealing with
here. The screen game, really fun kid to watch. High school quarterback.
The running back sail routes out of the backfield.
No question. Yazoo County from Mississippi. Fletcher Cox went there. Hall of Famer Willie Brown.
Nice. Eagles
right
connection.
now, there's only 2 players in the country at 400 yards receiving, 400 yards rushing.
Okay.
Gainwell is one of them. And also Max Borghi, the little number 21 from Washington State.
He's a true sophomore, too.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then backs with 1,000 yards rushing.
Okay.
He's the leading receiver in the country right now.
Interesting.
So a kid that's obviously loading up the stat sheet, both sides, rushing, receiving. Also a great story off the field. Game Day did. He had a brother that had a stroke suddenly a couple years ago.
Geez.
And someone that's really been there for his brother through some hard times there. So anybody that wants to dig that up, I'm sure it's on YouTube.
True sophomore, so not eligible for this year.
Nope.
We'll talk about for 2021. Let's get to some of these seniors, though, for Memphis. The big one, I think, coming into the year, I think a lot of people, it might have just been the name, was the tight end, Joey Magnifico. I know you watched him. I studied him over the summer, saw him up close. What are your thoughts on Magnifico?
Yeah, he's an interesting tight end. He doesn't have great size. He's under 6'3". He's about 246. He's more of that move player that'll be the wing, kind of in the slot position.
Yep.
Not a whole lot of production, but when he does get the ball, it's typically down the field. A lot of those bubble pumps will get him down the seam. A couple of the post wheels, they like kind of soft hands. He's a big-bodied guy.
He had some stupid good catches against Temple, to the ground.
Right. I was actually not big body. He's just kind of thick.
Yeah.
He's
like
kind
a Chris
wide
Cooley
shoulder.
kind of build and
yeah,
body
very
type.
much so. The names I have written down are Donald Lee, Owen Daniels, and he's that unsuspecting type of guy in the pass game. Just big, soft hands. He's a good target. Good crack blocks on swing screens and things like that. He's a former linebacker. He's got a bunch of really good effort and attitudes blocking. His hands aren't the most reliable, but a guy that I think could win down in the red zone.
Yep.
Yeah, just not a huge production. They have tons of receivers that get down the field, so he doesn't see a whole lot of targets in the pass game, but intriguing player.
Yeah, well, let's go to the defensive side because I know they've got some guys that you're intrigued by on that side. Let's talk with the linebacker, Bryce Huff, and the DB, TJ Carter.
Yeah, Bryce Huff, who just got the nod for the Shrine Bowl this week.
Okay.
A lot of production right now. I think the last 2 years, he's got 15 sacks. He has 33 tackles for loss. Right now, he's second in the conference in pressures, only behind Temple's Quincy Roach.
Yep.
Really nice player. This is a really short defensive end outside linebacker. He's only 6'1", 250.
Okay.
So I thought he was going to be in that Jannard Avery role from University of Memphis, kind of undersized outside linebacker. But this kid actually will slide inside. He'll play some 3-tech. He'll kind of slide and even play some 1 and some nose tackle and some sub packages.
Okay.
Violent player. All hustle, all effort. He's not really that speed, bend the corner type, but he's a guy that wins with violent hands, aggression, motor, the whole deal. Kind of reminds me of Ronald Blair coming to App State.
Okay.
Kind of that undersized, rocked up, played up and down the line.
Love that kid at App State.
Great motor. He was so much fun to watch just because he played with his, his hair on fire. Also that DeAndre Walker out of Georgia last year.
Yeah,
John Simon.
Kid. Okay.
Guys that are rocked up, tough, violent hands, play with effort, but they're just really small for the position, stature-wise. So all these guys are right about 6'2".
Yeah, it's he's a guy that certainly, I mean, you showed me a couple of those clips with that short area burst. He's playing sideline to sideline. Certainly flashes on tape. What about TJ Carter?
TJ Carter is really interesting corner. He's got great speed, good makeup speed. He's rarely ever gets run past. Occasionally they'll blitz him on some corner blitzes. He's great at the crack replace. Okay. So the second that receiver comes inside a block, he knows to replace in the flat, which means you're going to be a really good force defender in the run and on perimeter pass plays. He's really tough in run support. The only issue is he's a little bit small. He's 5'11", 180, so he's giving up some catches at the catch point. Occasionally will lose balance on transitions and flipping his hips. And then a lot of his big plays are just from bad QB play. And that's something you really have to kind of take in consideration with, I don't want to say smaller schools, but, group of 5 schools, non-power 5. Sometimes opposing quarterbacks are just crappy.
Right, yeah.
And you really have to kind of take his production with a grain of salt because this kid got his hands on tons of passes the past 3 years. I think he has over 30 PBUs the past 3 years. In 2017, he had 4 picks. He's got a forced fumble every year. Kind of reminds me of like a Tavon Young at a Temple.
Yep.
Not tons of redeeming qualities, but just a really tough player, a guy that, had a lot of experience at Temple. LaMarcus Joyner as well, probably had a little bit more upside.
Yep.
But he's only a junior, so he might come and hang out for his senior year.
All right, well, that's good to know. Let's go to the other side. Cincinnati, they've got a tight end who's going to the Senior Bowl as well, and that's Josiah DeGuara. You and I have both watched him. Let's get your thoughts on DeGuara.
So a similar package to Magnifico in that he's an undersized player. So DeGuara, again, under 6'3", under 240.
Yep.
So we're really talking about kind of a thicker receiver, a move tight end, a guy that plays out in the slot.
Like a Trey Burton type of player.
He's a guy that's going to win primarily in the pass game, out in space, out in the slot there. He's got good suddenness in his routes. He's shifty. He can win with the shake routes, the slants, the in-breakers. He's got some speed cuts. He's got good hands. He just lacks any dimension with the ball in his hands in the open field. Doesn't really have that extra gear to go get it. There were a couple plays where I thought it was a good throw and he was just a step short. So you would love to see that extra gear, that extra burst to kind of go get it, is how some scouts describe it. But he's got the good speed to get off the line of scrimmage and get rolling there. Kind of reminds me of like the Thomas Duarte out of UCLA, Steven Anderson, Lance Kendricks, who played a lot of good ball for the Rams and the Packers the past couple of years.
I wrote down Gerald Everett.
Gerald Everett as well. I thought Everett had a little bit more juice out of South Alabama.
Yep.
Did a little bit more with the ball in his hands. They would give him some like jet sweeps and stuff. I remember at South Alabama there. But Josiah DeGuara, definitely a big opportunity at the Senior Bowl to maybe take advantage of some matchups against smaller corners.
It's not a great tight end class overall, so I think he's got the ability to kind of go in and, we're not saying he's going to be a first or second round pick, but, make some money. Just show, show what he can do. Certainly athletic enough to make plays down the seam. Let's get to a couple other Cincinnati guys. Michael Warren, the running back, I know some people really like, and then the DB, James Wiggins as well.
Yeah, Michael Warren, only a junior right now, but he's 5'11", 220. He's got good size. Very high production kid. Kids returning in 2019. He was right up there with Jonathan Taylor and ETN and Eno Benjamin with guys returning to school. Had 1,500 yards catching and running last year, 20 touchdowns last year. So a kid that's been on the field a ton, great production, another 1,000 yards this year, 12 touchdowns. So hasn't really been the bell cow for the offense they wanted to. They wanted him to be, but a really good player with a lot of production and good size.
And then take us through Wiggins real quick, because he's a guy I know nothing about.
Yeah, so James Wiggins, a player I really don't know much about either, but you show up on the freak list back-to-back years. Typically, I'll write your name down. That's Bruce Feldman's list where he'll profile some off-season workout numbers. So 4.40, 37-inch vertical, 11-foot broad, putting up 225 18 times. So kid's definitely doing the work in the offseason. Was initially a Miami commit, so that was always interesting, but he tore his ACL this year, so he hasn't been on the field.
Got it.
So, but
a
player,
file away.
Yeah, exactly. So you see somebody on the freak list, you typically write it down, file away, and we'll see if he shows back up.
All right, well, let's talk about some of these other matchups, because you'll obviously be at this AAC title. I want to get to you about some of these Power 5 matchups as well. And really quickly, one matchup for me that I'm going to be watching in the SEC title, Georgia-LSU. The Georgia left tackle, Andrew Thomas, is a guy we talked about a little bit. To me, from what I've studied, if he were to declare, I think he's one of the top players in this draft. Certainly one of the top one or two offensive linemen that I've studied so far this year. He's big, he's physical, but he's also got pretty light feet as a left tackle. Going up against this LSU defensive front, he's going to see a lot of Rashard Lawrence, the senior defensive end in their 3-4 scheme, and then the pass rusher, K'Lavon Chaisson. You've seen both those guys up front. How do you feel about both Lawrence and Chaisson?
Well, a big opportunity, I think, for Chaisson to put himself against an NFL caliber tackle and show scouts that he can win. He just really doesn't have the production. I think he's a pass rush technician. He's just not finishing enough, and I want him to really take advantage of the opportunity against an NFL caliber, potentially a day one tackle in the NFL. All
right, so I'm going to put you on the spot. SEC title, Georgia, LSU. Who do you like in this game?
I'm going LSU.
Right,
They've been too good on both sides of the ball, running the ball, throwing the ball, defense. Great secondary out there. They have enough pass rush, I think, to give that offensive line and Jake Fromm some trouble. They're just playmakers all over that offense. And I like that they're involving the running back and the tight end this year in the pass game, on top of those stud receivers on the outside, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. Just really impressive group.
The only shot I feel for Georgia in this game is defensively. They've got to get after Burrow. That front's got to be able to disrupt some things.
The defense has to make a player too.
They have to, no question. All right, but I agree. I'm going to go LSU in that game, which opens the door now because Georgia is number 4 in the playoff rankings going into the weekend. If Georgia loses, that opens the door for either a Utah or an Oklahoma or potentially a Baylor. So let's get into those two games. Oregon, Utah, Friday night. Who do you got?
I'm going to go with Utah.
I agree.
Yeah, I think they've just really been hitting their stride down the stretch of the season here. Oregon's just that team that every week it seems to be up and down. You don't really know who they are. Big opportunity to Justin Herbert to kind of right the wrongs and perform well against a really good defense. But I just think Utah is really too strong right now.
Yeah, we'll talk about Herbert later in the show with both with Kyle and with Tony and just the opportunity he's got this week. Big rematch in the Big 12 title. We've got Oklahoma versus Baylor. Baylor had them. I mean, they were up big, too. They were up huge in that game. Oklahoma fights back and takes the win. How do you feel about this rematch here? You haven't seen either. No, you've seen Oklahoma live.
I saw Oklahoma this year. I haven't seen Baylor, but I'm a big fan of Baylor and Matt Rule and the transition that program's gone through, and just they've been competitive every week. They should have won that first game against Oklahoma. I'm expecting them to right the wrong and get the W.
Baylor gets the dub.
Yep.
This is tough for me. I think it's tough. I think Lincoln Riley with a second crack at it is tough to beat. I think I'm going to go Oklahoma, although it wouldn't shock me if Baylor were able to pull it off. I don't want to hedge my bets here, but I'm going to go Oklahoma.
And Oklahoma this year is just one of those teams that they've been struggling through some quarters.
They have.
And then you get praise for Jalen Hurts being gritty and a gamer and putting the team on his back, but he was also the reason the team's in the hole in the first half.
Right.
So I think we kind of look at Jalen Hurts like too much of a rescuer superhero and not so much of a, well, you're the reason we were in this mess to begin with type of thing.
Well, this is a big Phil Snow game. Phil Snow, the defense coordinator down there for Baylor and Waco. If they can come out, keep Lincoln Riley and Jalen Hurts confused and not sure what they're seeing, get some stops early, and just hold on to that lead, they'll come away with the win. But that's, as we mentioned, LSU, if that holds true, you've got the ability now. If Utah wins, I feel like they're in. If Utah loses, if Oregon pulls the win over here in Utah, Baylor wins the game, they're in the playoff, which is great, like bonkers
crazy
to think about.
It.
It's insane.
And Baylor's got some really good players that really aren't household names.
They're not.
They have a running back here from New Jersey. Matt Rule still pulling some kids from his old Temple days. And then Denzel Mims on the outside is a really impressive receiver. Just a really good football team.
Yeah, no question. Let's go over to the Big 12, or the Big 10, rather. Another rematch, Ohio State, Wisconsin. The Badgers kind of put up any kind of fight here because Ohio State made pretty quick work of them a few weeks back.
I thought it would be a more competitive game that first time around. So having seen that first matchup, I don't see any sort of competitiveness from Wisconsin.
And we don't think the ACC, you just saw Clemson. You don't see any kind of fight there.
I don't believe so.
It'll be good. It should be a fun weekend. I'm excited to watch this SEC title. The Pac-12 title is going to be a lot of fun as well. The Big 12. Those are the three big games, I think, from the Power 5, talking about the playoff and things like that.
Yeah.
Certainly the three games to impact this weekend. Well, Ben, before we let you go, we got a couple Senior Bowl announcements we're going to hit on really quickly.
Nice.
Pitt corner Dane Jackson was announced, I want to say, early on Monday. 6 foot, 191. He's probably the best. This is a weird thing to say. He's probably the best senior corner I haven't watched yet. I've watched a good amount of these guys. I've heard good things about Jackson. Haven't gotten to him yet. I know some people question his speed. Do you know anything about this kid?
No, I haven't watched a whole lot. I only have his information down, but I know he has tons of starts. He's been on the field quite a bit since his sophomore year. He's a senior right now, red shirt. Tons of ball production, a lot of PBUs, a lot of interceptions. I think he had 4 forced fumbles either last year or 2 years ago.
Okay.
So that always intrigues me to see that from a cornerback that's getting his hand on footballs and poking it away. And, the cornerback group, the cream of the crop is typically in the junior class.
Yep.
So you make your way as a senior in a corner. He might be the best corner prospect up there with Christian Fulton. And
you got Fulton, you've got Trevon Diggs, you've got Jeff Gladney, you've got AJ Green, you've got Damon Arnett. It's actually the senior corner class this year is actually pretty good for what a typical, because you're 100% right. You'll usually get a ton of junior corners that come out. I feel like this senior class of corners is actually pretty good, a little bit deeper than normal. And then Tuesday, announced a handful of names. First of all, we got a long snapper. First long snapper, LSU's Blake Ferguson. What are your notes on Blake Ferguson?
That's all I got.
Well, they've got another LSU kid.
He spins it.
He can spin it back there. What's funny is I remember being in the stands at the Senior Bowl. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a scout for another team, and we were watching. He said, "Hey." He's like, this Navy long snapper. He was like, I'm not kidding. Like, he's like a generational talent at long snapper. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, yeah. Okay.
What makes you a generational talent at long
I don't know.
snapper?
He hums that thing back there, and he ended up getting drafted. He went in the 7th round to New England, so he must have been pretty good. That's all I got. That was a few years back, the Navy long snapper. That's my long snapper story for the Senior Bowl. All right. A few more names from Tuesday. Portland State tight end Charlie Taumapeo. He was at the Shrine game previously. He's a guy you and I both watched together. I think the all-around game, he does a little bit of everything. He's a pretty athletic kid. I think he can get down the seam and do some things. He's still pretty raw from a route running standpoint, getting off the line of scrimmage, a little bit raw still, some drops. I think he's another guy we talked. It's not a great senior tight end class. He's got the ability to kind of help himself, and really help him his stock down there in Mobile.
Yeah, I still have to do his tape. I think he has games against like Arizona and Oregon, I think, as well.
He was Arkansas.
Was Arkansas? I swear he played Oregon last year.
He might have played.
Okay.
They played Arkansas week 1 this
150,
year.
I think, against Oregon.
Yeah, they did Arkansas this year, week 1. He had a solid game. They played Boise State as well, but I think he missed that matchup. So Taumapeo's a guy that can help himself down there. One guy I really like, he was initially committed to the Shrine game, is TCU running back Darius Anderson. I talked about him a couple weeks ago on the show. 5'10", just over 200 pounds. He's got an explosive burst. He's got top-end speed. He was on the freak list for that speed. I like his vision. I like his toughness. The guy I wrote down was Chase Edmonds when he was coming down to Fordham. Before he got hurt this year in Arizona, was putting up big numbers. Darius Anderson's a guy I kind of like.
You like him more or less than Aaron Green from a couple years ago coming out of TCU?
I like him more than Aaron Green for sure.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I like him more than Aaron Green.
That style of player,
yes,
though?
That style.
200-pounder, slasher,
jitterbug,
light feet.
Yep. He's got light feet, change direction, but he's got long speed. And I like his vision and his toughness inside,
Was that Aaron Green or Alex Green?
No, it was Aaron Green.
Who's
Alex
Alex Green? Alex Green was the Hawaii running back, went to the Packers.
Yeah, that's a good name. That's
Aaron Green was the Nebraska transfer. He left because of Amir Abdullah.
Because of Amir Abdullah, and then he went to TCU and was competing. They had another running back there at TCU that year, too.
Yeah.
Too many names. All right, another LSU kid, wide receiver, tight end, Steven Sullivan. We talked a lot about Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson.
Dude, this kid's enormous. His
6'5", 242.
His arms are so long. I think they moved him to tight end at a default.
Right,
he was just so big, and I think the receiver room was so overrun with the young kids. They just said, "Hey, go be a tight end."
They rarely announce guys as wide receiver, tight end for the Senior Bowl. So the fact that they did that, I think this is my take on it, is that he wants to be a receiver. The league wants him to be a tight end, and they're like, all right, we're just going to list you a wide receiver, tight end. You'll probably do some things with receiver drills, but you're going to be a tight end at the game.
I think he's still listed as a receiver, except he's just slowly moved his way closer to the line of scrimmage in the trenches. He's always like a slot, then the trips,
like
then
Steven,
a wing.
You're still a receiver. You're just going to put your hand in the dirt.
And then Burrow's like, put your hand down, and then suddenly you're in the tight end room during the week. And
right.
It's like, when did this happen?
I don't know much about him. Jim Nagy had tweeted, he said, when people are watching just the all-target tape of this kid, watch all of his targets down.
Just buy in. Be a tight end. So,
I know. Well,
so in
Darren
April,
Waller, like we talked
in
about
April
this.
when we have those spider graphs of your metrics and how you compare to all the tight ends in the history, you're going to look great. You're going to be in the 95th percentile.
Right.
Everyone on Twitter is going to be clamoring for you because you tested off the charts.
Yep.
But little do they know you were actually a receiver.
He could be Barkevious Mingo, too.
Exactly.
6'5", 242. And then the first quarterback for the Senior Bowl being announced.
Oh, Anthony Gordon. Nice.
Anthony Gordon from Washington State, who I have not done yet, took over for Gardner Minshew, so a one-year starter there for the Cougars. I know he's been pretty productive.
Yeah.
I haven't watched Washington State play once this year, I don't believe. So I couldn't tell you about his skill set
yet. I haven't seen him too much either, but I know he's a kid that's paid his dues there. He got picked over last year for Gardner Minshew. He came over being a grad transfer, and Gordon's got tons of highlight throws.
Yeah.
Obviously in that air raid scheme.
Sure.
A lot of plays from the pocket there, but he'll let it rip, man. He's got some good anticipation throws. He's got good size, good arm strength. Just a matter of whether the production's, based on the scheme or not, whether he can kind of put his hand under center and operate an NFL offense.
So you've got some homework for, we don't know if it'll be next week or the week after, but coming up here, we've got the second annual Ben Fennell All-American team, which will be a lot of fun. Last year...
only get to put players on it that I've seen.
That you've seen live. That's it. So only the guys that you've seen live. And
which I've seen in most of the who's who in college football.
You've seen a good amount of the top players. So
didn't get to Ohio State this year.
No, you didn't get Ohio State.
Usually we'll have an Ohio State at least at some point during the season.
You had Illinois, Michigan? Yeah, you had Illinois, Michigan.
And we did Michigan State, Northwestern.
Right.
Don't talk about my Big Ten games. It's been a rough year for Big Ten.
So we've got that. I don't know if it'll be next week or the week after. I know we're going to preview the college football playoff next week, but we will see you next week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Great stuff from Ben. You could follow him on Twitter at @BenFennell_NFL. Does a great job helping us throughout the course of the football season. Of course, here every week on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Helps me get ready to produce Eagles game plan as well, previewing not just what we saw this past week, Eagles-Dolphins, but this coming matchup here with the Eagles against the New York Giants on Monday Night Football. Let's now move on to the next part of the show. It's time for Mr. Relevant with Kyle Crabbs.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
All right, well, this week on Mr. Relevant, really happy to welcome back to the show our friend from the Draft Network, Kyle Crabbs. Kyle, welcome back, man. It's excited to have you on. We had you on in the summer when we did our kind of our process series, just kind of talking through the evaluation process. Excited to have you back. Talk some turkey here with some of the top prospects around the country.
Yeah, this is pretty bittersweet because we're getting ready to gear up for draft season now, but it means the end of the season's right around the corner, and it feels like it just started. But glad to be here, Fran.
No question. It goes faster every year, but this one in particular, just the regular season flew by. Obviously, we've got a lot of great football left, but look, a lot to kind of cover through here. So I want to start things off. With the regular season now in the rearview mirror, we all talk about Joe Burrow and, Jalen Hurts and quarterbacks that have helped their stock. I want to ask you, who's a guy that's outside of the quarterback position that you feel has really helped himself most so far from what you've seen through the first 12 weeks of the regular season?
Yeah, I think the name that comes to mind for me first is South Carolina defensive tackle Javon Kinlaw, who I know one of our colleagues in the industry, Dane Brugler, was really high on at the beginning of the season. And I watched his tape in July and August and said, yeah, there's something there to work with. But then you watch him this year, and he is just a completely different animal as far as remolding his body, and the raw power and straight line linear explosiveness that he plays with is really really startling. And this is shaping up to be a good defensive line group. But Kinlaw behind Derek Brown for me is comfortably a potential top 25 talent. There's a lot of fits that I think would make a lot of sense for him in the second half of the first round. And he's done a great job in putting a lot of great tape on display this year.
Yeah, he's certainly a guy that has really helped himself. He's healthy this year, healthier than he was a year ago when he played through that injury, and then also shed some pounds. He looks a little bit lighter this year, and he's moving a little bit better, which is certainly good to see. I got to ask you this. Eagles fans, flood my mentions on Twitter with speed, more speed, regardless of what side of the ball. So I got to ask, and I'll ask a lot of our guests, who's a player that stands out to you that's also a good football player, not just a pure track guy, but brings that speed element to the NFL, any position. But when you think of speed personified in this draft, who's the first name that kind of pops in your head?
Well, it's got to be Alabama wide receiver Henry Ruggs. And I know that's a popular player to slot to the Eagles in a lot of mock drafts. And I think the value with where Philly's probably going to end up picking here, unless they make a run and get into the playoffs and are picking after 20, makes a lot of sense for them. You watch Ruggs, and the first thing that becomes apparent is how explosive he is when he's working off the line, when he's in the open field with the ball in his hands. But then you really stop and appreciate all the little peripheral things that he brings to the position as well, as far as his route running abilities and quickness at the top of his routes. He's not one of those guys that can, only beat you vertically and separate. He can separate in the underneath areas. I think he's really tough for a guy that's not super big framed either. A lot of times you see those guys that are a little bit more narrow in the frame, and they don't do well when they're asked to work over the middle in the intermediate areas or working through traffic comfortably. And Ruggs does all of those things really well. So he's another name that again, another top 25 talent in this draft class who just exudes the explosiveness that would really quench the Eagles fans' thirsts.
One of my favorite questions to ask people when they come on the show is, a player that they're higher on more so than other people, a guy that you would stamp and say, you know what, this is one of my guys in this draft. Who would fit that category for you? If you've got a guy on offense, a guy on defense, who kind of fits that moniker for you?
Yeah, I'm going to stay in the trenches. Jedrick Wills, the offensive tackle from Alabama. It kind of took the wind out of my sails when Daniel Jeremiah this past week came out and said he was a top 20 player, because nobody really associates Wills with the top of the offensive tackle class. It's Tristan Wirfs over at Iowa and Andrew Thomas over at Georgia, who's been considered a consensus top 10 player. Jedrick Wills for me is my second-rated offensive tackle right now. I have him 12th on my most recent big board that I put out for the Draft Network. And from the waist down, he is as clean of a prospect as you're going to find. His ability to mirror guys in space is tremendous. He plays with great functional strength, ability to reset the line of scrimmage. I thought he's gotten better with his hands this year. His hand strike timing is where it needs to be. I'd be comfortable with Jedrick Wills based on his movement ability, drafting him in the top 15, potentially the top 10, asking him to play on either side of the line of scrimmage. Right now he is a right tackle, so there will be some questions there. That may be something that has some teams hesitant to really buy in, but I am all in on Jedrick Wills on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, I know your friend Ben Fennell is in on Carlos Basham from Wake Forest, and he is a player for me that is really exciting when you watch him play. We talked with all the players we've talked about so far. We talked about explosiveness, and Carlos Basham is another name that checks that box as far as what he's able to do when he's tasked with firing into gaps, locking horns with offensive linemen. You don't ask him to play on steep angles, but you ask him to play straight ahead, and he really flashes in those areas. And he's been one of the most productive defensive linemen in the ACC this year.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about guys that have that that explosive quality, those speed traits that teams are looking for. And one guy that certainly fits the bill is Penn State wide receiver KJ Hamler. You had him in the first round of one of your more recent mock drafts. I think 25th overall to the Green Bay Packers. You're a Big Ten guy. You're local to the area. A lot of fans obviously local to the area as well, and have watched KJ Hamler. I haven't studied him yet. I've watched plenty of Penn State on TV, and I have a sense of his skill set. But I want to get your overall evaluation of him. How do you view him making that transition to the NFL? Is he a pure deep threat? Does he have that catch and run ability? Is he more like a Paris Campbell, what we saw last year, where he hasn't proven that vertical ability? What are your thoughts on Hamler and how he makes that transition early?
Yeah, he's lightning in a bottle as far as what he's able to do with the ball in his hands and what he's able to do at the line of scrimmage to defeat press coverage. anybody who can, you go back and watch him against Ohio State in 2018, put Sean Wade, the nickel corner from Ohio State, in a blender and beat him off the line of scrimmage for a big catch and run for a long touchdown against Ohio State. That gives you a really good idea of what he's able to do. And I think he's a guy who can win inside and out, which I think will give him exponentially more value versus just being a guy who you want to put in the box and say he's a slot receiver at the next level. I think he's got Z capability with his speed and burst and ability to stack guys vertically. But where he wins right now is get the ball in his hands quickly, let him make plays. And that was why I thought it made so much sense to give him to a team like the Green Bay Packers, who have height, weight, speed guys all over the place. They don't really have that silky smooth guy who can work the middle of the field, create run after catch, but can also line up in all the other positions and kind of fill that Randall Cobb void that Green Bay's been sorely missing over the course of the last couple of years. So I think he's fairly plug and play as far as from a route running and defeating press coverage perspective. And he's super quick at the top of the routes with the ball out of his hands as well as with the ball in his hands.
Yeah, certainly a player I'm excited to study moving forward. That the catch and run on that slant against Ohio State last year is certainly something that put him on the radar of a lot of people, mine included. Let's wrap this up here, Kyle. Question for this weekend. You know, we've got championship weekend here in college football, a lot of conference title games all around the country. What's one matchup from an NFL draft standpoint that you're most excited to see? Is there a player versus player matchup that really kind of piques your interest going into the weekend?
I think the one that stands out the most to me is a player versus opposing team perspective, and that's Justin Herbert, the quarterback from Oregon, versus this Utah defense. It seems like 3/4 of the Utah defense is going to be down in Mobile, Alabama this year for the Senior Bowl. They're just loaded with a lot of experienced talent, and Utah plays a very physical brand, and we saw what Utah was able to do to Jacob Eason earlier this year, as far as Eason being what was perceived to be an ascending player, and then he plays against Utah, and the wheels kind of fall off the bus, and he throws the pick six, and it costs him the game. Herbert's, I'm still waiting for that game from Justin Herbert that really I get excited about, where if I'm a team that needs a quarterback, coming into this year, Justin Herbert was QB 1A or QB 1B, depending on your perspective, with Tua Tagovailoa, because he has such amazing physical ability, and he has this rare blend of like prototypical pocket passer size. He's athletic. He can beat you with his legs in man coverage, and he's got a cannon for an arm. But as far as working off script and being comfortable when he's under pressure and under duress, he just doesn't appear to have that innate feel for the game in that way. That's really worrisome if you're going to invest in a guy as a potential top 10 draft pick. So this seems like one of Herbert's last chances now that they're most likely effectively eliminated from the college football playoff picture. This is like Herbert's last chance to really sell people on what he can be at the pros when he's under duress. So that's what I'm most looking forward to.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that matchup in the next segment with Tony, and I 100% agree with you, because I feel like he's the guy that, of all the players that are playing this weekend, he's got the most to gain. If he can come out and he has a big performance against Utah, whether they win or not, if they lose in a shootout, if he has a big game against this defense, that's going to open up eyes, and that's going to give them a lot of momentum going into, you know, their whatever bowl game they end up in, and then into the Senior Bowl and moving on past that. If he's able to build off that, if it's more of the same, I think we're just going to still have that same discussion with Herbert, where it's, yeah, we see all the tools, he just hasn't been able to put it together. Now he's going to have to wow in interviews and on the board and things like that down at the Senior Bowl and at the Combine. But if he can just have this big performance in a big spot against Utah, I agree with you. That's certainly the matchup for me that I will be most interested in going into the weekend. Well, Kyle, appreciate it, man. Excited to see you down at the Shrine Game, at the Senior Bowl. I'm sure you've got all your guys' stuff planned for this week or for those weeks down, and you can follow all of that stuff over at the Draft Network. You guys, I've said it before, do a great job covering the NFL Draft year-round. Kyle, appreciate it as always. We will talk to you soon here on the show.
Yeah, it's a pleasure as always, friend. Thanks for having me.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
Well, very happy to welcome into the show Tony Pauline from the Pro Football Network. Tony, excited because this is a time of the year now where, from an NFL draft standpoint, it's very, very interesting. You know, the college football regular season is over. It's crazy that it's already over. But now we're starting to get a little bit more news, a little bit more information about who is going to enter this 2020 draft. And one name we got recently in the last couple of days is Missouri tight end Albert Okwuegbunam, the underclassman tight end, very athletic kid. I've watched him in years past. I think his upside is really, really high. What's the word on the street about Albert Okwuegbunam?
You know, there's going to be a lot of questions as far as how much he's into football. And the fact is he bypassed last year's draft where he would have, if he had come out, he would have been a second-day pick because he's got academic pursuits. From what I'm hearing, he wants to get into the medical field, which is a wonderful thing. There's nothing bad about that. But what happens is the scouts kind of try and balance that as per his desire to play football. So I think what's going to happen is he's got great character. As you said, he's a terrific tight end with great upside. But scouts, I think, during the pre-draft process are really going to grill him out as to, you know, if things get tough or there's some bumps in the road, is he going to be able to handle it? Or is he going to go back to the academic pursuits that he basically stayed in school for in 2019 and go into the medical field, which from my understanding, I mean, he's top notch at that. So, you know, he's got two different things that scouts have got to balance. The desire to play football versus the academic pursuits. And it's not that it's a bad thing. It's that scouts want to know that football is going to be a priority for him.
Exactly. This isn't a knock on Albert Okwuegbunam. It's just a question that scouts are going to have, and they have that with a number of players coming out every single year in the draft when they've got other interests. The question then becomes, you know, the same thing was asked about Jerry Tillery last year in Notre Dame. You know, you have that come time and time again here with players. All right. The thing with Albert Okwuegbunam is that, you know, his head coach, Barry Odom, was let go, was fired by Missouri this weekend. And unfortunately, that is a part of this business this time of year, is that you're going to see colleges part with head coaches. And so the thing that I like asking you about this weekend every single year is that, okay, with some of this movement in college football, with the coaching carousel starting to get going, how is that going to impact the 2020 draft? Because you're going to see some underclassmen that now decide, you know what, I'm not going to stick around for my final year under a new coaching staff. Albert is one of those players with Missouri. Let's go to Washington, where Chris Peterson, shockingly, on Monday announced that he was stepping down as the head coach of the Huskies. Jimmy Lake, the longtime defensive coordinator, is stepping in now as the head coach. Are there any players there with the Huskies that are underclassmen that, you know, even though Jimmy Lake, he is has been there in-house, so it's not like a new face, but is there anybody that could be impacted by Chris Peterson stepping down?
Yeah, potentially. Now, the thing is part of the reason I heard it was done was, you know, Peterson may have been burnt out. We don't know the entire situation, all the details, but Jimmy Lake was going to get a big-time job. He was going to get a big-time job, possibly at USC. Maybe if the UCLA job opens up, he was going to get a big-time job. But now it looks like his big-time job is going to be at Washington. You know, how is it going to affect? Well, you got to watch Jacob Eason, the quarterback. You know, he's played well at times. He's looked phenomenal at times. Other times he's been very inconsistent. He looks very ordinary. What does Jacob Eason do? What does Hunter Bryant, the tight end, do? Hunter Bryant's had some outstanding games. There's been talk about him leaving. I've been told all along that Keith Taylor, the cornerback, is very likely to enter the draft. You know, naming or elevating Jimmy Lake as the head coach, which is probably going to go beyond, beyond this season into the following season, I think is something where you may be able to keep those guys, in tow. They may be able to stay at Washington because they've got a guy who's liked, a guy who is well respected as the head coach, and he comes from within. So, you're not going to have all that turmoil. You're not going to have all that change. One last thing about Missouri, you mentioned Albert, the tight end. Don't forget Jordan Elliott, the defensive tackle from Missouri. He was the first guy to basically say he's leaving, he's entering the draft once Barry Odom was fired. And Jordan Elliott's a guy who basically isn't mentioned a lot on the outside of scouting circles, but he's very well liked in the scouting community. Could be a top 42 pick.
Interesting. Yeah, he's a guy, obviously, I didn't even mention, but Elliott's certainly a name that's gotten some buzz. Let's go, Chris Peterson, a guy that's very, very well liked. I don't know that there's always that same sentiment with Boston College head coach Steve Adazio, who was just let go by the Eagles over the weekend. Any players there for Boston College who may now decide to jump into the NFL?
Well, you got to look at A.J. Dillon, the running back. I mean, the big downhill power back. I don't know that it serves him well to go back for another season because, he's basically a one-dimensional downhill between the tackles runner. All it's going to do is going to be another year of pounding on his body. I don't think he's going to really improve his draft grade all that much. I think he's a third-day guy because of the fact that he's a bit one-dimensional. I think he'd be a third-day guy in 2020, same thing in 2019, unless somehow he loses 20 pounds and shows the ability to turn the perimeter, which you can't do. They've got some other guys there, Brandon Sebastian, the cornerback, John Lamont, the inside linebacker. But I think overall the one name that you're looking at right now is A.J. Dillon.
Let's go to the SEC, Tony, because the other big name that was let go by their school this week was Matt Luke at Ole Miss. Another coaching turnover, another coaching change there with the Rebels. Any underclassmen there that you feel could be affected by this decision?
Not really. I mean, Matt Luke was really let go because Ole Miss has done so poorly, and they've done so poorly because he's not been able to recruit the way Hugh Freeze did. And not only does it affect the wins and losses at Ole Miss, it also affects their impact on the NFL draft and really even from the senior class. I mean, Ole Miss when Hugh Freeze was there, was a program that was consistently putting players in the first round. You're looking at potentially the first player from Ole Miss being selected in the fourth round. I see no underclassmen from the program that would impact the draft if they entered.
All right, well, let's go to a school where it's not necessarily breaking news because Florida State parted ways with Willie Taggart a couple of weeks ago, but obviously a program that is, has plenty of talented players in it. Who are some players that you feel could make that jump, or do you know that will make that jump into the NFL from Florida State?
I've been told for the longest time now, for more than a month and a half, Janarius Robinson, the undersized pass rusher, is very likely to enter the draft. I don't grade him too highly. I think he'd be better served returning to school, but I'm here. There's a very good chance he enters the draft. Obviously, his teammate Marvin Wilson, who I grade right now as a late third-round pick, could enter the draft. I was told that once the season finished, he was going to start that process of getting opinions and getting grades. You got to look at their big receiver, Cameron Terry, and, of course, the running back, Cam Akers, who's probably more of a late-round pick.
Let's go and stay in the state of Florida, and this was news over the weekend. Charlie Strong with the Bulls down there at South Florida was fired from Texas a couple years ago, did not last long at USF. Is there anybody there with South Florida that could be making the jump?
Not really. I think the big story there is what does Blake Barnett do? I mean, the quarterback who was not rated by scouts coming into the year, I had a late-round grade on him, played okay in the beginning of the season, was hurt after the fourth game, had season-ending surgery. He is a fifth-year senior, played 4 games this year. Does he petition to come back for another season, or does he just throw his hat into the ring for the NFL draft? I don't think he's going to get drafted at this point in time. I think he will be signed as a priority free agent. But the big story at South Florida is what does quarterback Blake Barnett do?
Yeah, and then a few other smaller schools as well. Old Dominion, UNLV, New Mexico, also parting ways. Any names that we would keep an eye on from any of those 3 schools?
None that I can think of, or none that I've seen. I mean, those guys, their seniors rarely impact the draft, never mind underclassmen.
Yep. All right, well, let's move to a player who did officially announce he is going to enter the NFL draft on Monday, TCU wide receiver Jalen Reagor. I've studied him over the fall or over the summer, was really, really intrigued by this kid. He is an explosive, deep threat, sharp route runner, can impact the game down the field multiple ways, can be a gadget guy as well. What's the stock? What's the buzz here on Jalen Reagor? What are you hearing about this kid right now at this point in the process?
Yeah, and a return specialist as well. I think a lot depends on how fast he runs. I have him right now as a second-day player somewhere in that second round. I think the problem for Reagor is I'm also hearing that KJ Hamler of Penn State is also going to enter the draft. And they're similar sort of players. Smaller guys, very fast, can score from any point on the field whenever the ball's in their hands. Again, guys that you can use at receiver, you can line them up in the slot, you can use them as return specialists. But the more of those, even C.D. Lamb, who's a bit of a smaller receiver, very likely to enter the draft, the more you get that similar type of players, or the more of them there are, that means that one guy's draft stock is going to fall. And I think when you pit Jalen Reagor, as much as I like him, against KJ Hamler and CeeDee Lamb, he probably falls third in line, which means if those other two guys enter the draft, which I expect them to do, Reagor's going to be kind of on the outside looking in when it comes to the first round anyway.
Well, let's get to what we've seen over the last couple of weeks here, Tony. And your stock up segment, a lot of players obviously on the board here with some of the high stakes games we've seen over the last couple of weeks. Who's your pick this week for your stock up?
Oh, it's got to be Derek Brown. I mean, here's a guy who I've absolutely been in love with the past 2 years. I had him graded as a top 12 pick last year. Then he decided to go back to Auburn. He's played well this year. If you watch the games, teams are constantly game planning around him. He's constantly being accounted for. 7 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, and 1 quarterback hurry against Alabama. I think it's not just the numbers, but if you watch the game, he made a bunch of game impacting plays during important times during that contest. I mean, right now I've got Derek Brown as a top 8 player in the draft. I have him as probably a top 6 selection. People are sleeping on this guy. He's big. He's powerful. He's athletic. You can move him all over the line of scrimmage. The fact that he went back for a senior year and he played well, where a lot of times guys go back and they kind of like redshirt or they take it easy because they're preparing for the draft. The way this guy has played, I mean, lights out for Derek Brown. As I said in a piece on Pro Football Network this week, you watch around the net how Derek Brown is all of a sudden going to make a big leap up mock drafts. I had him as a 6th pick when I did my most recent mock draft.
Yeah, certainly a really, really intriguing talent, an outstanding run defender at the point of attack, Derek Brown. Tony, let's get to this week's matchup. It's conference title weekend here, championship weekend. Who's a matchup that you're excited to watch here when it comes to Friday or Saturday?
Yeah, it's got to be Friday night's Pac-12 game. Justin Herbert against the Utah Utes and that very talented secondary. You know, Justin Herbert's got a rebound against from what was a very bad game against Arizona State, where he turned the ball over and basically his play led to the fact that Oregon is no longer in the national championship conversation, while Utah is. And Utah, you got Jalen Johnson, who I'm told is going to enter the draft. I have him graded as a 3rd-round pick. You got Julian Blackmon and Terrell Burgess. Burgess is a guy who wasn't even graded by scouts coming into the year. Both of those guys graded as last day picks. Julian Blackmon is a versatile guy, sort of a nickel corner or safety if you want to use him, can also play special teams. They got another underclassman by the name of Javelin Guidry who plays cornerback you got to watch out for. And then, of course, there's Francis Bernard, the athletic linebacker that we've talked about in this podcast since August. His play's only getting better. You don't think about Francis Bernard as a defensive back, but you know what? Francis Bernard can cover 20, 25 yards down the field with efficiency and with quality. So Justin Herbert has got to rebound from that game, but you know that Utah really wants to beat up on Oregon to make a statement to get into that Final Four of the national championship playoffs.
Yeah, no question. It's going to be a really fun matchup on Friday night. I feel, I've said this for a few weeks, I really feel like the Utes come away with this one. And not before Oregon had lost to Arizona State and Justin Herbert didn't look right. To me, I think you look at Utah. This is a very well-rounded team on both sides. Excited to watch this matchup on Friday night. For me, my matchup of the week, excited to get your feedback on this, will be Wisconsin, Ohio State. You look at Jonathan Taylor, 2 of his worst performances in his entire career, because his body of work over the last 3 seasons has really been, outstanding, legendary in terms of, we haven't really seen much of it in college football over the course of history. But 2 of his worst performances have come against the Buckeyes. His worst one in terms of yards per carry, 2.6 yards per carry, came this year against Ohio State. Only 51 rushing yards in that game back in October. So I think when you look at Jonathan Taylor going up against this front 7 with Ohio State, we all know about Chase Young, but Malik Harrison, the senior middle linebacker there for the Buckeyes, is really, really intriguing to me. A guy that can play sideline to sideline as well as come downhill, big-bodied kid with some range. I think this is a really interesting one-on-one matchup. Jonathan Taylor looking to kind of get off the schneid against Ohio State. Huge stage. Go up against this Ohio State front 7. That's going to be a matchup I'm excited to see.
Yeah, and Harrison's really developed into a 3-down player. He's also really improved his play against coverage. But it's not just Harrison. I mean, they got Pete Werner there, who is a terrific linebacker, has really played well in recent weeks. Turf Borland, who's been a mainstay of the past 2 years. So it's basically, as you said, their entire linebacking unit at Ohio State is very, very good, with Harrison being the best.
All right, Tony, well, let's get to our mock draft roundup. Last question of the afternoon for you. We've got Jordan Reed's mock draft from the Draft Network. He's got the Eagles picking 12th overall, taking Oklahoma's CeeDee Lamb. You had said on the show just last week or the week before that CeeDee Lamb was going to enter the draft. It's not official yet, but if it comes out of your mouth, it might as well be. What are your thoughts on Lamb's value there in the top 15 and even the top 12?
I like Lamb as a receiver. I think he's outstanding. Good hands. Terrific running after the catch. I want to see what he is as an athlete before I anoint him as a top 15 pick. I mean, he could be a top 15 selection. Let's see how fast he runs. Let's see his shuttle times. Let's see his route running, at the combine. Basically, we see time after time those Oklahoma receivers do exceptionally well in that system because of the way that system is so receiver and pass-oriented happy. Same thing with the quarterbacks. Listen, I like Lamb as a receiver. There's no doubt about it. But I'm going to really reserve judgment until I see his testing times and see how he pans out as an athlete before I anoint him as a 12th pick of the draft.
Yeah, certainly something we will be keeping an eye on when we go out to Indianapolis for the Combine in February. Well, Tony, appreciate the time as always here on Draft Buzz on the Journey to the Draft podcast driven by AAA. We will talk to you next week.
Look forward to it.
All right, so I mentioned it there with Tony. A player that I am very much excited about is a junior wide receiver who officially declared for the draft, made the announcement on Twitter on Monday, TCU's Jalen Reagor. He is our subject this week in Scouting Report.
Dim those lights. We're headed to the film room for the Scouting Report.
All right, so Jalen Reagor, a dynamic threat. Well, this is a guy I have not watched yet off 2019. This is all purely, I'm going to go through my notes, what I saw from him in the 2018 season after watching him over the summer. This is a guy who now is a 2-year starter playing for Sonny Cumbie down there, their version of the air raid offense, lined up mostly as the number one receiver to the outside, typically to the right of the formation there for the Horned Frogs, lined up in the slot, did get moved around to the backfield as well, so he was moved around, but typically lined up to the far right of the formation, decent height, below average frame. Seems like the way he catches the ball, he's got pretty big hands. We'll get official measurements in February at the Scouting Combine. This is a loose, fluid, sudden athlete. He's got high-end change of direction skills, dynamic qualities from an athletic standpoint. He's got great speed, multiple gears, and the ability to take the top off of defense at a very high level. He didn't get pressed often at the line of scrimmage, but when he was, I thought he showed the ability to defeat a jam with really quick feet and surprising play strength to handle a punch at the line of scrimmage and attack upfield to hold the red line and get vertical. This with his athleticism, I thought he showed the ability to be a really sharp route runner. He knows how to work blind spots and get defenders to flip their hips as he pushes his vertical stem. He's not a finished product there right now, but the upside is very high, and I thought there were some really good flashes. He explodes out of breaks. He can definitely create his own separation, runs a really nice comeback route to pair with all of his vertical routes. So this is a guy that can certainly be a really, really effective vertical weapon, shows the ability to track the football downfield, but quarterback play there at TCU often kind of kept him last year, I thought, in his sophomore season from being able to show that he could be a vertical weapon. So I'm excited to dig into the tape from this year, see if that quarterback play improved a little bit, if he was able to show a little bit more with his ball tracking skills. Really strong hands catcher, though. Plucks the football away, immediately tucks it to make an athletic move, made some great one-handed catches on tape, watching him as a sophomore, lined up in the backfield at times and did get carries as a ball carrier, including reps in the Wildcat, and they tried to get him the ball as quickly as possible. Screens, jet sweeps, reverses. He was a weapon with the ball in his hands, can create yardage for himself with his combination of athleticism and vision and competitiveness. He'll throw a stiff arm here and there as well, and he's got the wiggle to shake a defender one-on-one in the hole. He transitions into a runner immediately after the catch. So a lot there to work with this kid from a dynamic standpoint. Obviously, he's not a contested catch weapon. He's not a guy that's going to consistently just go up and win one-on-one. He will attack the football, but he's not that kind of a player. He did have a couple of focus drops on tape. That's something I want to keep an eye on. He did pluck the ball, but just some focus drops that he's got to work through. He's feisty as a blocker, but with his size, he's not a guy that's going to be a mauler on the perimeter. But that was really the extent of the negatives that I saw. And again, he needs to improve in some areas in terms of his route running. He needs to improve from a technical standpoint in areas, but overall, overall, I thought that this was an explosive athlete who can work vertically, be a weapon downfield, while also being a gadget guy from the slot and from the backfield. He's got a dynamic skill set, provides the offense with a nice shot in the arm. I'd love to see him continue to improve as a route runner and against press coverage where he flashed greatness. But to me, I thought there were a lot of similarities to John Ross when he was at Washington. This was a guy that went in the top 10, and some people didn't think he was going to go top 10. Some people thought maybe top 15, top 20, top 25. Ended up sneaking into the top 10 a couple of years ago. No one's talking about Jalen Reagor that way right now. We'll see if that changes over the next few months, but this is a dynamic playmaker who has the ability to be a threat at all three levels of the field because of those qualities. He's a guy I'm really, really excited about. All right, so that'll do it there with Jalen Reagor. Let's now move to your questions in our draft mailbag.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the draft mailbag.
All right, so as always, the number one way to support the show is to go onto Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave us a rating, and leave us a question, leave us a comment. If you go and leave a question, now's the time. You'll get it answered right here on the show in our draft mailbag. And we want to give a shout out here to JD, who left a 5-star review on our Apple Podcast page with the question, who are the speed linebackers in this class who can play sideline to sideline? I'd love to see some next-level speed at the second level. So looking at the senior class, JD, I think when you look at Malik Harrison from Ohio State, this is a guy that I think is flying a little bit under the radar, can play sideline to sideline, big kids, got some physicality to him. Francis Bernard from Utah is a player that we've talked about a lot on this show as well. Definitely a sleeper entering the year, not so much a sleeper anymore based off what he's done in his first year as a starter there with the Utah Utes, but this is a guy who's got 3-down ability and can play sideline to sideline. Akeem Davis-Gaither, we talked about him a couple of weeks ago from Appalachian State. He's going to the Senior Bowl. This kid's got great top-end speed. That's probably one of the strengths of his game, is that he can make those plays from sideline to sideline. I like his ability to play in man-to-man coverage. Troy Dye from Oregon, another senior, I think is cut from the same cloth. He's a little bit undersized, a little bit skinny and angular, but he's got great downhill speed. He's got that short area burst to close. His athleticism certainly stands out. We had Jim Nagy on a couple of weeks ago. I asked him who the fastest player was on defense, and he said Davion Taylor, the linebacker from Colorado. So this is another guy who's an outstanding height, weight, speed prospect, a track athlete, didn't play any high school football, didn't play until he went to junior college. So you think that some of his best football could potentially be ahead of him. He is a high-level athlete for the linebacker position. So those are just seniors that have that speed. And then when you look at the underclassmen, and these guys haven't declared yet, but two certainly that stand out would be Dylan Moses, who's coming off the torn ACL. So you want to monitor that. We'll see if he does decide to go back to Alabama. But before that, I thought he was one of the top players in the country and had all the tools to be a 3-down player, an impact player at the linebacker spot. And then Isaiah Simmons, we talked about him earlier with Ben, certainly looks the part, safety skills, but with a linebacker's body. This is a guy that's going to be very, very intriguing. A lot of people are going to be very, very high on. Certainly has that sideline to sideline speed. So, I think when you look at this linebacker class overall, a lot of guys that really, really flash in a lot of different ways. There's speed, there's size, there's instincts, there's tackling ability. You need to be able to, you'd like a nice little combination of all the above there, but certainly some guys with some speed. So if that's what you're looking for, there's some examples of that here in this class. All right. Great show this week. Really appreciate the time, obviously from Ben and from Tony, but also from Kyle Crabbs from the Draft Network, and appreciate all of you out there for listening. We've got some great shows lined up over the next couple of weeks just because the regular season is over. So the Journey of the Draft is just kicking into high gear. So make sure you're tuned in here to the Journey of the Draft podcast driven by AAA. For everybody here at the NovaCare Complex, I am Fran Duffy. We will talk to you next week.